it can put you in a very bad position because you just keep doing it and you're not changing, you're not growing, you're not, flexing to what's happening. And
What's been the biggest change you guys have seen as far as you've worked with a bunch of different ranches and how they
Mhm.
manage their cattle. You see how they do it, and then you and Tim are coming in without any cattle experience, and you're coming with fresh eyes and a different perspective, and you obviously have uh, a very technical background as well, and so you're able to bring in different platforms and softwares and processes. What's been the biggest thing or one that you've noticed that it's like, oh, this is how everyone else is doing it? Why don't we do it this way? It's very different. It's drastically different, but this is why it's so much more beneficial now with the technology and the stuff available.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest things that we've done, number one, when you come in kind of with a fresh set of eyes, right? You see things differently, and that can be very much a double-edged sword where being new can be terrible, right? Because you're like, you don't have the experience, you don't have this plethora of information to make good decisions based on that experience, right? Um, but you also aren't stuck in this. This is the only way to do this, right? It those two things kind of, and maybe sometimes being new is just you don't know any different, right? So you might do something just because you're dumb enough because you haven't dealt with it yet, but that experience can lead to something better. Um, and and I can go back and I can tell you like an interesting story that I learned in the Navy that I think about all the time. But I think one of the big things that we look at all the time is there's a technical aspect because you can trace more of like how your performance is as a whole, both from a business perspective as well as a cattle performance perspective. Um, but one of the biggest changes we did was the traditional way that cattle ranchers made money was if I was a cow calf producer, was I had to have cattle that were a certain size at a certain time. So that would dictate my whole year from when those calves were born all the way through when I sold them. And if they were born earlier, they could potentially be bigger, so they were worth more money because you get paid by the pound. But then you're dealing with like calving them in Montana in February. So then you're going to have higher stress on the animal. You're probably going to be into those animals for more medication because they get sick. There's all these things that play into that. It's stressful on your people. And so one of the things we did was and this is not anything that we came up with. There's all of these theories are out there. This is just the direction we decided to go. So I'm not claiming that I made any of this up. But we shifted our calving later into the year so that we tried to mirror more like a natural cycle with those cattle. And the way that we do business, that works for us. It does not work for everybody. But we pushed our calving dates into the middle of April. And what that does is it allows the nutritional, natural nutritional value of like grass that is growing to meet what those cows need when they need it most. And I think that for us, where what we did was we sacrificed a little bit of size on those cattle at a specific time, but there was more of them and we were into them for less. So from like a business perspective, we actually were technically making more money because from a man hour, from just the overheads that we were into that same animal, even though it might be slightly smaller, we had more pounds and we were into them for less. So those little things that we were able to make changes in our operation in adjustments where that might be very hard to do for a multi-generational business. That's like, nope, we do this, right? And great grandpa so and so would roll over in his grave if he knew you were going to change anything. There's like this emotional attachment to these operations, and a lot of time dad's still alive, grandpa's still alive, and they're seeing this and they still have input, right? Where we don't necessarily have that, which is sucks at times because there's times I'm like, man, I wonder how they fixed this when they had this problem in the past, and we're just figuring it out for the first time. But that flexibility has given us a lot of opportunity to make changes as we've needed to, and I think that's played into a lot of the success that we kind of have had up until this time.
So we're going to title that the is it Putnam?
Yeah.
the Putnam theory of cattle excellence. That's where that came from. If anybody is interested, you can Wikipedia. It's on Wikipedia. It's a whole thing.
I'm just waiting for people on YouTube to, start talking shit. Like, yeah, this guy, he says I'm a lot, anything. And he claims he came up with this whole theory, and this guy's an idiot. His mustache is lame. I'm just ready for that.
Like, where did the personal attack come from?
Yeah. So you gotta, people love.
First off, no one ever say that mustache is lame.
That's right.
No, they said that nobody would say that.
That's right.
It would make them immediately without credibility.
Yeah. Well, people on YouTube making comments aren't known as the brightest of all the people out there. But, but it was interesting. Like I was saying, there was a guy that I worked for when I was in the Navy, and, he'd been at a JSOC command for like 20 years. And I remember we were out and I was doing an augment with those guys, and the situation that we found ourselves in, it wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't great. We were not in this super advantageous position. Right. And I thought with the group that I was with was we are about to get after it. This is going to get wild. And I remember that guy was like, hey, get your shit. We are leaving. And we all packed up our shit and we left. Right. And everybody made it back safely. And I remember we were back on the platform that we were on, and we were sitting there eating or whatever. And I said to him, I'm like, man, I'm kind of surprised that you guys weren't more inclined to go get it on. And he was just totally zero ego. This guy had been doing it for so long. He had nothing to prove right to anybody other than being a great leader and a great operator. And he was like, why would we do that when it wasn't 100% sure we were going to win. He's like, we'll go back and win when we have the deck 100% stacked in our favor. Right. And I'd done a bunch of deployments and stuff. I wasn't a brand new guy, but that was the first time that it was ever kind of explained to me that way from somebody at that level. And you could see the amount of experience that person had to where, he wasn't even playing unless he knew he was going to win. Right. And I think a lot about that now, in business and with whatever we're doing. And I use that story a lot with my crew, especially on the cattle side, where, there's things they might want to do. Right. And it might be something that takes a high level of skill. There's a high level of potential of somebody maybe getting hurt. It's the end of the day. Horses are tired. People are tired. And, I think about that lesson all the time. And I go are we being as advantageous as possible to 100% winning? And I say that to my managers and stuff. I'll be like, hey, could we do this tomorrow? Or does this has to happen right now? And a lot of times it doesn't, right? And then you come back and you do it. And one of the things I think about with this business, just from a very trying to learn all the time because we are new, but also observing all the time what we're doing and trying to get better, because it's really important to me and to Tim. We want to build, a good reputation within this space, right? We want to open the door for other people to be able to come in. The fastest way to close a door and lock it is to do a shitty job. And we all know team guys and military guys that go into different companies, they get an opportunity because of that, and they completely ruin it. And it ruins it for everybody else. And one of the things that we really focus on is I've seen the positive benefits of agriculture for me and the parallels of military skill set into that space. I've, had to figure out kind of on my own how to get over those barriers of entry into the industry. And we've tried now to help other people get into that. So we work with nonprofits, we work with universities. I'm a big proponent of doing these things to talk, more about agriculture, because I never heard when I got out of the Navy, it was you should look at tech and you should look at finance. And I was like, I don't want to do either of those things.
Both those sound
and yeah. And I was like, that's just not me. If somebody had said to me hey, there's this whole industry with really great people, super patriotic people. I say it all the time. Tim says it all the time. Food security is national security. The ability for the United States to produce our own food is a massive, upside that this country has that a lot of countries don't have. And producers are going away because there's a huge amount of people retiring, and there's not that many people that are backfilling them. And so one of the things I always talk about is there's a demographic of people coming out of the military that need an opportunity, And I do believe that a decent amount of those people have earned an opportunity. Not all of them. Not all veterans are great. I get it. But a lot of those folks have earned an opportunity, according to me. And here's this industry that has all these parallels with people that are basically like retiring without a succession plan that, have an opportunity. And I think it's something that more veterans should explore and look into, because there's just so many things that you might find where you're like, oh, I never even thought about that, and I wish I knew more about it when I had gotten out. So that's something that I love doing these podcasts. I love talking about it, not just from a promotion of Little Bell Cattle Company in our business, but also to shine like awareness on the industry as a whole, but also let people know. It's kind of like the way I look at it. It's like the first time an actual SEAL team guy or SF guy or whoever, whatever group you're in, says to you like, yeah, you can totally do it. Like, this is a doable thing. We try to, make it known that this is something you can do. This is something that you don't have to be born into. And you have to have the desire. You have to want to get really good at it. You have to have the commitment to develop the education and the skill set. But if you do that, like, there is an opportunity for you.
Yeah, that's a great message for all the veterans out there. We talk extensively about entrepreneurship, and even if you're not an entrepreneur, being an entrepreneur, joining in with people and helping them build their business out, or even just finding a cool company that you want to be a part of and contribute. Not everyone has that entrepreneurial mindset of being able to really problem solve out without strict guidelines of what the role is supposed to be. But having examples like yours where you came in essentially zero experience in cattle ranching. You found an interest, you had some means to make it happen. You had the GI Bill, you had some dispensable cash from the previous business and stuff like that. So you had resources in your favor, but really you had an opportunity to learn about something. You had an interest, you put in a ton of effort to learn about it, and then you built a business model around something that you just learned about. You didn't have family experience. You didn't have a community around you necessarily that was going to help build this up. It was you and your team that came to this idea that there's a lack, there's an opportunity here, and we can take advantage of it to overhaul the industry. Maybe you guys aren't trying to change the entire industry, but at least your little niche of it, where you see that this is something that needs to get changed, that can get changed, where there's huge opportunity for creating a market as a new company, and you took advantage of it. That's really what it comes down to: is learn about it, build a plan, and then execute on that plan, which is really where veterans thrive, especially soft veterans.
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing, right, that we did more than anything was like we bet on ourselves, right? And you could be working at a company, and it's no like disjustice to that company that you have like a side thing that you want to get involved with, you want to learn more about. But I made the commitment before I even knew that this was ever going to be like a full-time thing. I wake up every day and I feel fortunate, the same way I felt about the SEAL teams, that like I get to actually do this thing. Like, I get to work with people I do. And that doesn't happen right off. Sometimes that transition process is a process, right? And that's the other advice that I try to give people coming out from doing it myself, right? Is just like, it's a process. Like, give it some time. The more honest you are about what you want to do, and like the closer or the more detailed you can like paint what that bullseye looks like, the closer you'll get to hitting it. And I know for myself, like when I found the thing that I was interested in, I started to bet on myself, and that's where doors started to open. That's where people started to help me. That's where I started to build a network and a community. But I was extremely committed to learning and wanting to do a good job. And people will help you when you do that, right? But if you come into these things in the wrong way, or with a big attitude or an ego or whatever you want to call it, you're not going to open a lot of doors. But if you come in, especially if it's the thing where you're like, this is what I'm super into, this is where I want to go, this is what I want to learn. I think, you know, the betting on yourself, it's no different than the military, right? Like nobody's going to make your career for you. You have to manage your own career, right? And that's what we did in this, right? Like we just, and incrementally we've built and grown it. We've seen opportunity. This, what we're doing now was not our original goal. Just, I'll put that out there as well. Like we kind of had more of a traditional, hey, we're going to do this like livestock thing. We got good at that. During COVID, we saw a gap where, you know, for the first time, people weren't being able to get product on like grocery store shelves, right? And we started to look at the beef industry tied to the cattle industry. And then we started looking at what does vertical integration actually look like. I can't say if we knew what we do now, we'd even go back and make the same decisions, right? But at the time, we were making the best decisions that we could with the information we had. And that's gotten us to where we are today. But the key to all of that was just finding something you're like truly into, and then figuring out a way to get smarter in it, get better in it, get around the people that are already doing it, and see where it goes, right? Like nothing bad ever happens when you like go after it, right? You get a little bit closer, you get a little bit closer. Oh, I can't go this way, I go that way, right? And you know what I tell people all the time is you don't have to have all the answers, right? Like I truly, like I never thought I'd be sitting here talking about this in any capacity on a full time, um, you know, anything. And yet here I am because I kind of just took a chance and started doing something I liked and worked hard at you know trying to get better at it.
And at some point, you guys got linked up with Crowdcow. So that's how you actually ship and sell your meat nationally. I don't know if you guys do internationally or not, but at what point did you find out about that platform where you can, you know, I assume from what it looks like, Crowdcow manages a whole bunch of different well, not manages, works with a whole bunch of different ranches to distribute their beef to people that want to buy Little Belt products or whatever other ranch they may have heard of.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, what happened was, and all of these I feel like are always long answers. That's also that also is a fallout of being at STB Team One. Is that I don't know if everybody talks as much as I do, but when you sit alone for long periods of time, I can't sit quietly anymore. You know what I mean? But anyway, so when we initially started out, our whole goal was to put 100% Montana beef back into our community. And that was kind of our goal and how we kind of went down this path during COVID, right? And only 2% of the cattle that are produced in Montana get consumed in Montana. Typically, Montana cattle get shifted to the Midwest. They get finished there. They go to processing plants and get distributed from there. But they follow this very specific phase line. So we started working with local markets and local restaurants right off the bat. And luckily, those folks kind of took a chance on us. We started producing beef. We already knew because of how we were producing live cattle that we could play at the performance level we wanted to be at. So we do a grass-fed grain finish program, all upper choice and prime. So it's very conducive to like nice, you know, restaurants and not that grass-fed, grass-finished isn't, but typically you won't find that just for what, you know, people are looking for at higher-end steakhouses, markets that we focused on in the very beginning. So we did that. And then as we started to kind of look at, you know, Montana has a big tourist, you know, base here in Bozeman and Big Sky. A lot of those people were like, man, these sticks are great. Like, how do I get this at home? Right. So we went down this whole path. How can we start shipping? We tried to do that on our own. I don't know if I'd call it a big mistake, but we totally underestimated what it looked like to do fulfillment and distribution, especially from Montana, where you're not centrally located. The shipping's super expensive. You're dealing with perishables. And so we started looking at, you know, we recognized quickly we didn't want to invest the capital that it would take to do that ourselves. So how do you find a partner, right? You either got to do it yourself or you got to find somebody who already does it. And so we work with two distribution companies. One of them is a veteran company out of Kansas City that does a Wagyu program. And then we provide their Angus. They have like a veteran coalition called Kansas City Cattle Company. So we work with Pat and his team, and they do distribution online for us through this veteran coalition. And again, trying to encourage more veterans into the space, work with veteran companies that are already in the space. And then we got introduced to Crowd Cow through a connection at Cargill, which I find interesting because I got connected to some folks at Cargill, which is like one of the biggest privately held companies in the United States. And here were these people willing to reach out to like this small startup cattle ranch company in Montana, liked our background, liked our story. So here's this like massive US company and conglomerate still reaching back, having conversations with me, you know, and they were the ones that made the connection to Crowd Cow and the introductions. And, you know, they are, I believe they're an investor in that business. And they were like, oh, you guys would be a perfect fit for this. You guys should get in touch with them. So we started having conversations with the CEO and in their team. And Crowd Cow's fantastic because they've got a number of different ranches that do different things, right? You could have a grass-fed program, a grass-fed grain-fed program like us. You could have a Angus program, a Wagyu program, right? So there's a little bit of competition, but you're not, in my opinion, it's not like direct competition. If somebody likes Little Bell Cattle Company, it's not, I tell people all the time, liking Little Bell, the prerequisite isn't that you have to hate everybody else. You could like a bunch of other beef companies and like us as well, right? And we hope that you're supporting. I'd rather see you support local ranchers, local food production, U.S. food producers, versus places that import tons of beef. And there's tons of online companies that's what they do. They import beef from overseas, they repackage, relabel it, and they mark it up and sell it at the same price. And so their margin on that is huge versus like U.S. producers that are under a lot. There's a lot more protocols and things that you have to follow as a U.S. producer, which brings your costs up. So what I love about Crowd Cow is they support local production and they make it nationwide, right? So like I was saying before, never has it been easier to support, U.S. producers, local producers than it is today. And, they're an incredible partner for us. Just the way that they do fulfillment, the way that we manage like POs, even from like a cash flow perspective, they're a fantastic partner of ours where, we still run a lot of our own marketing and advertising. We have a lot of customers that go to them, but they cross promote with us. And they've been fantastic in getting our product nationwide, which again was kind of huge from a volume perspective. Like Montana only has so many restaurants, markets, etc., where there's this like very, there's definitely a glass ceiling there. Where with Crowd Cow, with Casey Cattle, we've been able to kind of push through that and now, increase our volume through nationwide distro.
And you mentioned something that piqued my interest. So I know very little about grading beef and distributing beef and all that stuff. The extent of my knowledge is basically there's prime, there's choice, and there's select.
Yep.
And you mentioned grass versus grass grain. Talk a little bit about what goes into the finishing of a cow and what the end result is, what the difference between prime, choice, and select that are for people that are interested in actually getting quality beef.
Sure. Yeah. Great
question.
And
do you call it finishing off? Do you call it finishing off a cow?
Finish off the cows?
Do you finish off the cows?
Yes, we do. We finish them off and then they get offed, but we'll talk about it. So we'll talk about what our program looks like. We'll talk about how they grade different beef and kind of what that means. And then I'll talk about the difference between kind of what we do in some different programs out there. So we do what we call like a pasture raised, grass fed, grain finished program, which means those cattle spend the majority of their life on big open pastures at the ranch eating grass. When they hit a certain size in age, they go to our feed yard and they're finished typically around 140 to 150 days on a diet that consists of both like grass forages and grain. And what that grain does is it adds marbling, or deep muscle marbling is what we're really going for. And it adds basically, fat onto those animals. And the other thing it doesn't, and I'll just preface all this with, there's like literally degrees that people have, like all the way up to doctorates in all phases of these things. And, so I'm going to break it down at like a super basic level. I don't have a doctorate in any of this stuff. So basically what happens scientifically, there's a lot of things happening, but the fat on a grass-fed, grass-finished animal is very like almost like yellow slash orangey looking. And what that is from is like the same thing that's found, carotene is found in grass, and that's what makes like carrots orange. And so you see this like very yellowish, orangish. It looks like an elk or a deer almost. Um, Typically in U.S. like consumer markets, if you saw that at the grocery store, it would not be very visually appealing. And if you saw that next to a grass-fed product, which turns the fat white over a certain amount of time, so you see
grain fed.
Grain fed, yep, grain fed. Sorry. So your grain fed is going to turn that fat like a very white color. And so what we're actually trying to do is get that transformation to happen. We would call it, getting those cattle to white fat is what's happening while that marbling is being produced. And truly,
What's that flavor difference between grass finish versus grain finish? Are you noticing much flavor, or is it just a visual appeal?
No, you are seeing a big flavor difference. So your grass finished stuff is going to be more. I don't know how to explain it exactly. It's going to taste more probably like not perfectly, but like almost like more like a wild game. And I'm not saying gamey, but it has much more of this like kind of natural flavor profile to it. Typically, those animals when they're processed are older, which has an effect on a flavor. With your grain fed, I mean, a lot of that flavor comes from the fat, and so you're getting like the more traditional U.S. consumer that's used to this like grass fed grain finish. If you put my brother, for instance, like if I served him, he's lives outside New York, eats at a lot of great restaurants. If I gave him like a grass-fed, grass-finished product, he would be like, "Ooh, I do not like this." Grass-fed, grain-finished is going to have like a higher fat content. There's different health benefits. The grass-fed, grass-finished market has really tried to kind of, from a marketing perspective, say like, "Hey, there's all these health benefits." Yes and no. They're pretty minuscule if you look at them across the board, to be honest. I think the way those animals are raised and grazed has a huge impact, like environmentally, and we can talk more about that. So we use a style of grazing and rotation that would be very similar to a grass-fed, grass-finished product. We just put our cattle on this grain-finished for the last 140 days, and that produces the fat, quality, color, and marbling that we're looking for, which leads into grading. So the way there's a whole scale. I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's when cattle are slaughtered and processed, they go through a grading process. We process our cattle at a USDA federally inspected facility. With that, we have a USDA third-party inspector that then looks at those different carcasses. And primarily what they're looking at is a certain section of the rib or the ribeye. And they look at age of the animal and then primarily the number one or one of the primary determination of where that animal is going to grade is through the marbling of that particular rib section. So higher marbling, higher grade. That does not typically have anything to do with the quality of the beef. So you could have like a very high quality beef that doesn't even grade select, but you're not going to get graded in that area. And typically your grass-fed, grass-finished product has a very, very hard time making it beyond select. And that's just a fact. Mm-hmm. All the grass-fed people out there are going to be like, no, I get prime grass-fed. Okay, sure. To get to those levels, typically you don't see that because it's very hard to develop the intermuscle marbling in the time frame that you have to do it. Because there is an age stop on stuff that can be graded. So all of our cattle are typically processed between 20 and 30 months. We don't process anything over 30 months because that makes it ineligible to be graded. And all of our stuff is graded. And typically everything we're doing is in that upper choice and prime. And that's very much a focus on what we're doing. So from cattle genetics through the nutrition, through the way those cattle are ran and managed all the way up until the day they're processed, a lot of that has to do with trying to target those upper levels because that's what that restaurant market in our customer base is kind of looking for.
It's interesting how aesthetics really drive the ag industry. Like eggs, for example, when we grew up, everything was white eggs. You never saw unless you grew up in a rural area where you got fresh eggs, everything was white eggs. And nowadays, the white eggs are like, oh, these are the factory farmed eggs, and the brown eggs, those are the organic ones.
Oh yeah.
But really, it's just brown eggs, or brown chickens lay brown eggs and white chickens lay white eggs. And there's obviously some variation to it, but that's essentially the difference between those. It's the type of chicken, not how they're produced, that give the different color.
Dude, the eggs in the Netherlands are like they're so fresh that, like, well, one, they don't go in the freezer. They go, like, they just sell them off the shelves. And then two, like, I would say pretty much every single box that I get, like, there's still feathers inside the carton. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, and
What
I
if
bet
they
they're
sprinkle
excellent.
those in just for?
They're fantastic.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
like super, like you can tell the color. It's really funny. So another
Dark
business
orange.
partner of ours, like multi-generational cattle guy, he's a fantastic guy. And he grew up like super rural. He only eats white chicken eggs. Like he will not. He's like he does not like. He thinks the brown ones are gross and dirty. And like it cracks me up all the time because I'm like, you know how many people are out there like talking about how great and he's like, oh, I don't care. I'm not eating one of those. I want the white ones. But you're right. The way, and you see all these guys like online and on Instagram and stuff, and you know all these people are like, oh, look at this beef. Like look at this. You know, look at the purple color of this versus the pink color of this. Well, maybe they don't understand it, or they're just very good at like marketing and gimmicks, but that coloration comes from old cattle. So like a lot of this coloration that you're seeing has something to do with the age of those cattle and nothing to do with the nutrient density of that meat. And there is a huge visual component to going to, you know, a butcher shop or a grocery store, seeing the meat on the shelf and seeing what does that meat look like. And that has a big impact on like the consumer's buying habits. And then you're also seeing a lot now on like the labels, but really what people, where the shift is actually kind of going now is people want to know who and where their product is coming from. Right. And we've kind of built our business around trying to give people a realistic look at what it takes to produce cattle here in the United States. What does it take to do it in this vertically integrated supply chain? And one of the things, kind of back to your question, you know, that surprised me still to this day is when you have a local supply chain and a vertically integrated supply chain, there's these like kind of partnerships that happen, right? Like you have to have a consumer base that is equal to or greater than your supply base, because you don't want to be, once these things are ready to go to processing, once they're processed and in the freezer, you can back up your supply chain, you know, downstream if you're not moving it out quick enough. So you have to have restaurants that support you. You have to have chefs who support you. You have to have a customer base that's buying that product regularly. Because without that, I mean, you could have thousands of cattle in the supply side, and if you can't sell them and move them, if you don't have the customer base to work through that, then it doesn't matter, right? And so we kind of took this.
That's interesting. To the number of head of cattle that you guys actually want to have as a ranch isn't driven by the amount of land you have access to. It's how quickly, because you mentioned that the cattle are no older than 30 months. I didn't realize they were that young. So you need to basically be moving these cattle every 30 months. Otherwise, you there's no reason for you to expand your head count.
Yeah, correct. And so like two things there, right? So we process typically your male calves, your steers, your male calves that get castrated at branding go immediately into your beef program. So if you said, so to break down the cattle stuff real quick, so you have cow calf producers that have cows, and every year those cows produce calves. So to make the math easy, say you had 1,000 cows, you'd get 500 steers, 500 females. The steers would go into a beef program, whether that's your own or nationwide, and the females go back into like reproduction. They're the factory. The next level would be called yearlings or feeder cattle, which would typically be those steers from the following year. They come to the ranch on grass and they get grown typically somewhere around 800 to 1,000 pounds. In our system, then once they hit that age, they go to the feed yard, they get finished to about 1,400 pounds, then they go to processing. And we stagger those cattle out based on size and time on grass so that every month we have a certain number, like if we have a semi-load leave, a semi-load comes in. And that's how we keep our supply chain like primed up. But to your question or comment, is if you don't have the output on that, the input gets backed up. So then you would sell live cattle into other programs. But for us, our whole goal was to get 100% of the cattle we produce into our own program. And as we've built towards that, we were selling steers to other, beef companies, and we were keeping the ones we knew we could move. And it's an interesting thing to look at. Like as we build our company, the marketing obviously on these things becomes like a massive component. And in 2024, ranching and beef production and beef distribution is very different than it used to be. So, my wife works for the ranch, and she does like all of our marketing, all of our advertising, all of our strategic partnership stuff. And we built a customer base really before we truly had a product. And so in beef, they say you either sell it or you smell it. And once it's in the freezer, you got to be moving through that product. So what we did was we strategically built up a customer base that was standing by as we put more and more product out there. And you almost have to keep that like teeter-totter perfectly balanced. And one of the things that surprises me is, if that customer base goes up and your demand goes way up, it takes you a certain amount of time to fill it. But if it goes down and you've built up this big, your demand goes down, but your supply goes up, well, now you're like out of whack there. And you're really trying to strategically like grow that demand while you keep the supply. You'd be better off, having a slightly higher demand than supply and working into it on the cattle side. And we've been very like strategic about how we've done that. And a lot of that has come down to, our marketing, just trying to build that customer base before we had a product to release into the space, because the last thing you want to do is trying to be like selling it. You more want to be like allocating it.
Yeah.
What's marketing like in the cattle business? I mean, is it, do you guys do much on social media? Is it mostly, yeah, you do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is it,
Yeah, we do a lot on social media. I'd say Instagram's probably like our biggest outlet. And again, trying to give people like a realistic look at what, our company looks like. It's an interesting thing though. Like that's definitely a different way of going about it, especially like in the ag industry. I'd say like ag is, it's similar to military and special operations in a way. It's quiet professionals, right? Like you don't see a lot of cattle ranches that have Instagram pages. But if you're selling live cattle into, a live cattle space, you probably don't need that, right? But when we started going into the direct consumer space, well, then how are you going to get your products in front of people? And so for us, the online profile stuff that we did, the social media stuff that we do, is all about, trying to get product in front of customers and new customers and in customer acquisition. And so it depends on what stage. If I was just selling live cattle into live cattle markets, that's a pretty small group. In my business as a customer base would only be cattle companies, cattle folks, right? Where we knew we were driving into this beef direction. And we also were a startup. So we needed different, revenue streams, especially in the beginning, to help us bring in revenue on a monthly basis. So like we had t-shirts, we had hats, we had sweatshirts, which is very different than your traditional ranches don't necessarily need that. But again, we had like an idea where we were trying to build a customer base. We were also trying to sell products to people that were outside of the live cattle business, because it's just such a small, percent of people. And all of those like little things kind of compiled as we built and grew, this customer base. But all of that was around our marketing, which we were like strategic about that in the beginning and trying to do it in a way that we felt good about, trying to do it in an honest way, trying not to do this like super gimmicky, like what I'm going to call like just this super hardcore marketing that you see within the beef space, where like you'll see these companies and they put the same pictures up over and over and over again. So you're like, okay, are you really out there doing that every single day? Where people who follow us and look at us, there's very much a seasonality to it. They very much get to see what our crews are doing at that time. And it's very different from January to August, right? And we try to update people on a regular basis, because we are out there doing it every single day, from our, whether, it's our teams are out there, our company is out there every day. in every capacity of those, of those different phase lines. And so we try to give people like a realistic look at, who we are and what we do and why we do it. But that's a change that, if you had said 10, 20 years ago, anybody in like ranching, cattle, beef would be, that would be a component of your business. They probably, and a lot of people don't, it's not my favorite thing to do, to be perfectly honest, but it's a key part now in customer allocation. And for us as a startup, it's not like we can go pay for hiring a marketing firm to do all that for us. Right. So we've done all that in-house. We've done a good job. We actually get a lot of custom compliments from people in the industry that are like, oh, we like your Instagram. Like, you guys are doing a good job on representing the industry and new people to the industry. And, that actually means something to me, because it's one of those things where at the end of the day, ultimately, like, those cattle are being slaughtered and processed and turning into food. And a lot of the cattle that we raise, that's where they're going. And we know that. And there's a lot of people that can potentially like be turned off from that. And I think a lot of people have lost the connection of where their food actually comes from.
Meat
And
doesn't come wrapped in cellophane.
it doesn't. And it doesn't
Package
just
ready to go.
magically, yeah, like it doesn't just magically end up at Walmart, right? And I think that connective component that we all used to have, because everybody, like if they go back far enough, had somebody that was within like ag food production in their towns and their families. And I think that connection is important, because it shows people the real folks that are out there doing this on a day in, day out basis, and really dedicated professionals, super hardworking. And again, to me, it's critical to the security of the United States is having a super high quality food supply chain that allows us all to have really easy access to probably like the most nutrient dense food that we've ever had access to, and easier than ever. But that doesn't happen by accident, right? And for us in a direct to consumer based business, super competitive against companies out there that have massive amounts of budget and the ability to like create marketing and content and all these different things now that are critical to these types of businesses. So that is something that like as a business we focus on for sure, that I would say is different. It probably gets snickered at, by people. People probably laugh behind our backs and make fun of us too. But
Well, you guys
they
hit
probably
it perfectly too with uh, the shift in popularity. Like I saw this one Instagram post was talking about how, I don't remember if it was chicken or sourdough, but one of the two is the gateway drug. Because once you start making sourdough and you see how good it is, then you maybe get some chickens, and then you open up those chicken eggs, and you realize that you've been lied to your entire life about the quality of eggs. And then you start growing your own vegetables, and like you turn into this whole homestead thing. And that's really the big, I mean, I'm sure Instagram has my algorithm down pat. So I get that stuff all the time of, sourdough, chickens, growing your own food. And so being able to ride that wave where the technology is there, the cultural shift is there. There's so much coming out now about just how terrible the food industry is and how bad the quality of our food. I think the stat is that your produce travels an average of 1,500 miles to get to you. Not you, Greg. You're in the healthy Netherlands. But for us, especially in places like Southern California, 1,500 miles is the average that a tomato or something is going to travel to get to you, which means it needs to be picked prematurely, and it's taking weeks for it to get to you. And as soon as something comes off the vine, it's losing nutritional value. And so it's coming not as good a flavor as you getting it straight off the plant. It's losing a ton of the nutritional value. And now you're also having this shortened shelf life because it's already been in transit for weeks before it gets to you. And then there's that whole other level of stuff with Bill Gates's appeal stuff, which I don't remember what type of oil, but it's basically a seed-based oil that they're spraying on a lot of produce to keep it fresh. But that type of oil is coming out of this huge carcinogen.
Yeah,
And
it's really interesting
so,
you bring
like,
that
people
up.
like you that are doing this stuff, it's an amazing shift that you're able to take advantage.
Yeah, so like people always talk about, right, these like your geo footprint, right, has a environmental impact. So our cattle never move more than 90 miles. The longest bus ride they will ever take is when they go from the feed yard to the processor, which is it's like 200 miles. That's the first. But while they're alive, 90 miles is the triangle that they will go in. Right. Those cattle will never leave a group of or a range of 200 miles their whole life. You look at all these like fake meats, you look at all these different things, right? When we were all super fortunate, right? And you have these nutritionists, and for anybody who's, you know, hasn't been fortunate enough to have like work with a nutritionist, strength and conditioning coaches, all this stuff. The number one thing they tell you to avoid is highly processed foods, right? If you're trying to be in shape, if you're trying to be fit, if you're trying to lose weight, doesn't matter what your goal is, they tell you avoid highly processed foods. There's nothing more highly processed than fake meats. There's nothing that has a worse environmental impact on the negative. Like it's monocropping. So you're basically you're just pulling, whoops, just knocked my computer over. You're pulling the same nutrients out of the ground over and over again. How do you get those nutrients back in the ground? Synthetic fertilizer. The amount of water, the amount of fuel to make this highly like as high a processed junk as you can get, and then try to convince people that it's good for them, right? So like the marketing, and that's something where the beef business is really under like big attack by these, you know, and these companies have huge budgets, and they've convinced all these people that this stuff's good for you, and in actuality, it's terrible for you and it's terrible for the environment. The way that we raise and rotate and manage our cattle, especially on pasture, has huge positive impact on soil health, on carbon sequestration, on, you know, you're taking something that is inedible to humans and turning into nutrient dense, high quality protein, right? And you're doing that through cattle eating grass and turning it into meat, right? And the thing where you start to look at your environmental footprint, which is a big consumer, um, it's something that people are interested in. And again, that all comes back to who and where. And the more local you can buy, the better. And all the things you mentioned on like the distance it travels, how do you keep it fresh? All those things have impact on what you're ultimately consuming. And, you know, for us, as we looked at like our overall program, part of the localization of what we're doing in that like vertically integrated step is trying to keep those cattle geographically tighter, and not having to travel all these super long distances. It's bad. It's hard on them from a stress perspective, but it's also, you know, you're just burning a lot more fuel. You're spending a lot more money. They're all the things. Um, but you have to have partners then on the back end that appreciate that it probably costs you more to do it that way, because, you know, corn in Montana is more expensive than in Kansas. There's a reason there's more feed yards in the Midwest than there are in Montana. And a lot of that has to do with like where that feed comes from and how, you know, the price you can get it bought at. We then have to have partners, restaurants, markets, online, whatever the case may be, that go like, hey, to do it that way costs you a little bit more. So the customer is going to see that on the back end. And so you really have to have the support of people wanting, you know, those types of quality, that type of oversight slash quality assurance in the products that they're buying, that it's worth them paying extra for it.
No, it's a remarkable thing now how disassociated we've become with our food, and how much we've really forgotten, um, in what we eat. So having people like you that are trying to reinvigorate having good, healthy, sustainable food sources, I think it's going to be a big part of our generation. Going to be shifting what we went to after World War II, where we just became a massive producer. Um, and you know, it was the pride and joy of America to say we're creating all this excess of food that we can ship out elsewhere. But it's like, yeah, how good is that food that we're creating an excess of? And so really getting back to having quality, high nutritional value, sustainable produce and livestock, I think is going to really define where we go over the next 20, 30 years with the nation. I think Kristen, my wife, said recently that 75% of Americans are overweight or obese. Like we're hitting a tipping point in society where something has to change, or there's just going to be a massive precipice in in health issues where there's just gonna be like this elite few who are actually healthy and living nutritious, active lives, and everyone else is just going to become a burden of society.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at like the U.S. exports all this like good high quality food, and then they import all this junk, and you're like that doesn't make sense in any like I can't think of anybody to be like, yeah, that seems smart. And then you see all these people that are like terribly unhealthy, and that all just compounds, and a lot of that comes down to like again, back to the deal. Like if you have a fitness goal, if you have a health goal or whatever the case may be, it's a combination of diet and exercise. And you start to realize very quickly how much your diet plays in the role of just how you feel on a daily basis. And then if you put that towards some sort of fitness goal, I mean, it's critical to your overall health, or it's at least 50%, if not more. And I think more and more people are realizing that some of the food that they're getting or places that they're buying it from. And a lot of people just don't know what it takes, right? And that's why for us, it's important there's a customer education component that we hope resonates with people where they go, oh, we like what this guy's talking about. That's the kind of product we'd like to be getting, and we're going to become a customer.
Getting people to change their consumption habits that's breaking like generational habits. I mean, people eat the way that they were brought up to eat. Not obviously like there's exceptions to that rule, but I think that a lot of people, the way that they're raised to eat, like that's the way that they're going to eat throughout their life.
Yeah.
So it's a tall task to change somebody's consumption patterns.
Yep.
For sure.
Yep. And it's
educate them.
Getting people to learn, like to take the time to go like, oh, I wonder where they start to ask questions, because there's a whole labeling system within the United States that, like if I like right now, if you saw grass fed, grass finished, I think what's implied there is cattle that are on pasture 100% of their lives. Not actually true by like the definition of what it would take to put that on the label. That could be they're on pasture and then they're eating, alfalfa pellets in a feed yard style deal, and they're still grass fed, grass finished. But like the consumer is very much thinking that they're, out on grass on these, and that may not be the case. And
it's the same thing with chickens, with eggs. You saw cage free, and then you saw free roaming. Like each one has its own stipulation. Cage free is they're not in a cage, but they're in this container where they're still packed in with one another, stepping on each other's shit. And then there's free roaming. They have access to the outside, but it's like
everybody that hears cage
hole.
Free thinks free roaming, right? And that's the thing. A lot of people don't take the time to look in those. Again, there's like all these companies out there, and I call it's just like we say all the time, like we're showing people who we are and what we do as our marketing strategy, but like we're not marketing, and we don't have a bunch of marketing gimmicks that we're trying to do to get you to buy our product, right? There's all these people out there that use all these gimmicks to try to convince people to buy their product. As people start to look at like, what does it mean to be this? They start to, they go, oh, I didn't know that. I'm going to start Googling quickly, like what do these different labels mean, right? That's becoming like a more educated consumer. And then the more those customers and consumers become more educated to it, they can start to self-identify the products that kind of meet the criteria that they're looking for. And it's very easy. Like I can look now at other beef companies, and I can look at their stuff, and I can get a pretty good guess of like what they do, how they do it, the numbers they do it at. And not all of that is always in line with what they're trying to convince you they do.
Well, you guys need to, do you guys have like a nutritionist on your guys' team?
We have cattle nutritionists and like meat scientists, but we don't have a human nutritionist.
It would be interesting. I'm just saying, for a social media standpoint, like this, like everything that you talked about here would be like super interesting little bites for me to like I would follow you guys just for that, to get like these educational nuggets on like what you should be looking into. Like, I mean, you guys would go meat specific, but you could even go, beyond that, right? And be like, hey, like this label means this, like don't equate it with this. So I don't know. There's probably accounts like that.
With my wife, she's a nutritionist. She'll break down all the little things, and you guys can use that for social media content.
That'd be awesome. But you know, she knows then, right? Like you see all these labels out there, and we have labels as well. When I was going through that process, you know, you start to learn this because they all get approved, but then you start to learn, you know, what is the true definition of this? What is the true and I know myself as a consumer, I'm like, oh, I thought that was something completely different.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, again, there's like a lot of gimmicks out there. And, you know, I think the more people that start to learn, you know, about these different things, and there's a lot of, you know, again, like there's a lot of negative marketing directed at beef cattle production as a whole, you know, by these fake meats and these different things. There's, you know, even within the cattle industry, right? There's grass-fed, grass-finished people that are saying, well, we're better than grass-fed, grain-finished because of this. You know, I can make the argument going the opposite direction, right? And say, well, we're better because of this. I don't. I kind of am like, hey, everybody find what they like. If you're supporting local U.S. producers, smaller U.S. producers, and you're doing that, like you're helping the overall. Find the product that you like and the people who produce it the way you want it, and that could be multiple people, right? And you might have a bunch of great grass-fed, grass-finished product in your freezer right next to the little belt beef, and I'm like, that's awesome, good, like great, depending on where it comes from, more than anything. But that's a big thing now, like, and I think it's never been easier to get that product, but it's also never been easier to get the information to learn what you're truly getting.
You just need to have the desire to actually go out and do that. So for the audience, we'll drop all this in the show notes, but where can people find Little Belt Beef? Any social media that you want them to follow, and anything else you want to put out to them?
Super. Yeah, no, I really appreciate the time today. So www.littlebeltcattleco.com is our website. There's a bunch of information on there. You also can order beef directly from there. It's got links to both the folks that we work with on that. And you can find all of our stuff direct to your door. Typically, it's there 36, 48 hours. So that's probably the best way to find us. On social media, our primary is on Instagram at Little Belt Cattle Co. You can find us on there, and you can see what it looks like on a seasonal, annual basis. We do a lot of like kind of ranch updates on there. You also can see a bunch of videos and pictures of kind of what it looks like and how we do business raising cattle here in Montana.
Awesome.
Oh yeah. Hey, I got one more question for you. Do you guys do a skill bridge program, or do you guys
That's the same thing? We spent
You guys do?
time together,
Great,
Greg.
great
I know.
question. So we've done it in the past. We do Skills Bridge. The one thing we were having a hard time with Skills Bridge is I'm just going to call it kind of like the vetting process. And so what we've actually kind of moved more towards is we've got some nonprofits that we work with that there's one called Bear Hug Cattle Company. There's a guy through Montana State University who basically like helps manage Skills Bridge in the state. And we work with those folks who have all of our info where they have people interested in ag. They typically connect us with them. And then, you know, we host some of those interns / nonprofits at the ranch to help them get started. All of that right now is all veteran focused. So we do that. We just don't do it. We don't have people like reach out to us directly, but if people go to Montana State University's website, Bear Hug Cattle Company's website, I don't think we have a link to it on ours, but they can find the information there. And if they're like, hey, I'm interested in doing this, the folks that kind of run, manage, screen, and do a lot of follow on with how are those folks doing, how did it go, what could be better. We started working with them to help us, you know, just do a better job of getting the right people in the door.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Greg, for being on the show. It's been a very enlightening conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really appreciate it. That was super fun.
Thanks, brother.
All right, man. Take care. Appreciate it. Let me know when this comes out. We'll help launch it out with.